I like to talk about what I call is the ABCDE for mindfulness. A, awareness. We're all very aware of Jon Kabat-Zinn's contemporary definition of mindfulness. What does it say? Awareness of the present moment on purpose in a particular way, non-judgmentally. But the critical aspect of that definition to start with is awareness of the present moment. It's very interesting. The term mindfulness came about in 1881. Rhys Davids was a British Pali scholar who interpreted the Pali word sati, S-A-T-I, as mindfulness. And he got that partly from Christian prayers. Historically, sati, in a Buddhist perspective, meant awareness of the present moment, to have sustained awareness, to keep your mind on what is on your mind, to collect, to unify your scattered mind. So awareness is an essential component of mindfulness. As I said, we have 60,000 thoughts a day. How many are you aware of? 90% of them are of the past or of the future. We are in the present moment, they say, 50% of the time. And I think that's a vast underestimate of the truth of what goes on. And what's our biggest problem? Distraction. And why are we distracted? Technology. And that's one of the biggest problems we have, that we are not focused on what is present because we are focused on what entertains us. We can be angry, sad, but do you really know when you're angry or sad? Or are you just angry and sad? And so what we need to develop is not awareness. What we need to develop is what is called meta-awareness. And meta-awareness means to know what you know. I can be angry and I'm really upset, but I just don't have that conscious ability to know I am angry. So how can we bring awareness to the present moment? And there's a very simple technique that we can use to help anchor us into that. And that is called labeling. Labeling means name what you know. So if I'm getting really angry or upset or whatever, can I name it? And in naming what is going on in your experience, you have had to step out of ownership. You've had to step back, observe, reflect, and name. So naming gives you a sense of separation from what is present, the capacity to bring meta-awareness to it. So how do you name? So, anxious, upset. I can say, I am anxious. I am sad. Or I can say, sadness is known. Anger is known. Or I can say, knowing sadness. You see the real distinction between I and knowing? When I say I am sad, I am reifying the sense of self, which, as we will discover later on, is the nemesis for our suffering. But in saying knowing sadness, that becomes a process. It becomes a verb. It becomes an action. So what can be exceedingly helpful in your practice to cultivate awareness, to cultivate meta-awareness, is to name your experience and simply say, knowing sadness, knowing anger. And when you do that, can that be the cue to stop, to turn towards, to sense, to experience, to sustain awareness of what is present, if there's time, until the sensation extinguishes. And then do something that we never really do. Savor the moment. So, label, stop, sense, sustain, savor. There are ways that we can cultivate awareness. I would be aware if only I could remember to be aware, right? So how do we support our memory to remember to be aware? And that is through cues, reminders to be aware. What are the cues that you can use? Well, alarms on your watch. And sometimes what I do during the day is I put my timer on for 1 hour. And when that timer goes off, it's like, okay, what am I aware of in this moment? Repeat it for another hour. Repeat it for another hour. And so throughout the day, I am constantly being reminded to come back to the present moment. There are apps on your phone that can be of value. Insight Timer. One can use Post-it notes. You know those paper things that we could put on our computer, our fridge, our cars, that says, are you aware? And the other thing is a physical cue. Okay, today, before I pick up my phone, I'm going to pause for 1 second. Before I go to the bathroom, before I eat, before I walk at a red light. So you can choose a physical cue for that day that is your reminder that says, what am I aware of? So let's try this quick exercise. And I would invite you all to sit up in your chairs, close your eyes, and simply experiment with labeling. And just be open to whatever arises in your awareness. And you can label it in a very generic sense, knowing thinking, knowing feeling, knowing a physical sensation. Or you can label it in a very specific sense, knowing judging, knowing sadness, knowing pain in my back. Just experiment for the next little bit. What does it feel like to label one's experience? Okay, let's bring this experiment to a close. So what did it feel like to label experience? Label what you know.
I found it really good to have these steps in place. And I played with this before, and what really freed me up to experience it was hearing that I don't have to figure it out. Just embrace it, or like you're saying, knowing it and savor it, but not have my mind take over to figure out. So why am I so sad? What's going on here? Just feel this sadness. And somehow that just made it so easy for me to absorb that now, because I don't have to put the mental work or get my mind back active.
So what was mentioned was the fact that it's not just labeling the experience, but it is experiencing what is present without having to fix or change it. And thank you very much, because that'll be the segue to the next part of the talk. Hi, Mitch.
I guess I don't totally get it, Phil.
Yeah.
Let's say someone's passed away and I'm feeling sad.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm being honest with my feelings. I feel sad. So if I'm thinking about that, but I don't sort of get knowing sadness versus I feel sad. So someone I love passed away, and that's how I feel.
So this is not about a denial and not experiencing what you're feeling. The biggest problem we have, and we'll get into this later, it is the ownership by the sense of self that creates our trouble. This is not denying what is present. If anything, it is shining a spotlight on it and making us aware of what is present. How many here have gotten in your car and driven from point A to B and gotten to point B and said, who was driving the car? Does that happen? Were you aware? How many of you have eaten a meal and at the end of the meal it's like, what did I just eat? That's what I'm trying to point out. It's try to bring awareness to what is present. There's a distinction between being sad and knowing that you are sad. There is a distinction between those two aspects of it. So this is not about a denial of what is present. If anything, you are enhancing it and allowing yourself to feel it in a more full and authentic way. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, so I noticed I started really thinking and my craving for like unraveling thoughts. And so craving to my thinking, I noticed I was craving to so many thoughts. And then I noticed like the rigidity. Yeah, so much rigidity, which if I would not acknowledge that knowing, I wouldn't know that I have all this rigidity. And so I felt that, and I realized that's my main rigidity, and then it loosened up. It just becomes so lighter, and it went away, and I was able to do the savor.
So what was said was the fact that we're never just with something as it is. We're always in relationship with our experience. And typically our relationship is one of resistance. And we never really see what we do with what we know and what we experience. And so what you were saying was, yeah, I could see the thinking and then the craving and then the resistance. And so you could see how you were in relationship with what is present by bringing awareness to it and labeling it. Very nice.
I found the concept of knowing somewhat more liberating, because I've been working with habits. So the concept, instead of like I am sad, I would say I have sad. sadness.
Um,
And I think by possessing it, it was still a little form of reification. You know, it's still kind of a definition.
yeah,
And so knowing just gives a little bit more space.
great.
And an ability to kind of see it on from different dimensions rather than having, identifying too much with what's
Yeah.
going on.
So very nice. The comment was made that there was a movement from I am sad to I have sadness to knowing sadness, and saying the knowing was a greater sense of liberation and less ownership of what is present. So we're using language to shape the way we see our reality. And in saying knowing, you are creating a separation from ownership because it's just a process. You're witnessing. That's what it is. It's not a noun, it's a verb.
Well, similarly, I think it's a real sort of dichotomy, because in labeling, we do step out, and it creates a pause. It's a slight sort of intellectualization, but in labeling it, it also sort of frees you to experience it without being totally overwhelmed.
So again, it's that what is being said is that you can witness without being overwhelmed, which really, again, is allowing for that separation and distancing.
That's usually, like last weekend, there was a situation where I just got so caught in the emotion that the reactivity happened, it seemed like in a split nanosecond.
Yes.
And I was like, ooh, I wish I hadn't said that, but it was like, so had I, been able to go, like, sort of notice the tension, or I'm a sponge for other people's emotions, I didn't do that till after the fact. I think for me, that's part of it, is in the awareness, trying to move awareness up before we just really react and get carried away.
And a beautiful point that you made here, because normally when we think something or feel something, we are just caught in the train. We're just on the ride. But by saying knowing, you are creating a pause in this automatic, subconscious, autonomous process. And then we don't say things we really don't want to say, or act in ways we don't want to act. Let's go on to the B of ABCDE. What is the single most practical, accessible, effective tool we have for stress management? That begins with the B. Breath. I would invite you all to sit up in your chairs, close your eyes, and bring awareness to your breathing. Are you breathing in through your nose or your mouth? I would invite you to put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly. And when you breathe in, is it the hand on your chest or belly that rises? And now I would invite you to count, and count in seconds how long you breathe in, and count in seconds how long you breathe out. Okay. How many here breathe in through their nose? So it looks like everybody. How many here breathe from their belly, their diaphragm? In other words, their belly rises when you inhale. Well, the majority of you do. How many breathe out longer than you breathe in? And again, the majority. So we recognize that when we look at optimal breathing, in through our noses, it humidifies the air, it purifies the air, it releases nitric oxide, which is a blood vessel dilator. That breathing from your belly is better than your chest. Chest breathing is very limited. When you're able to descend your diaphragm, that stimulates the parasympathetic system, relaxation phase. And critically, when you breathe out longer than you breathe in, again, stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system. Inhalation, sympathetic system, fight, flight. Exhalation, parasympathetic system, relaxation phase. And ideally, if one could, breathing in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6 to give you 6 breaths a minute, that is called slow breathing, is optimal. So let's just experiment again. I wish if you could all sit up straight in your chairs, close your eyes, put one hand on your belly, and just breathe. Breathing in through your nose. Breathing such that your belly rises with an in-breath. And breathing in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6. So we'll bring that exercise to a close. What did you feel when you were breathing in that way, especially with that slow breathing component?
It's easier for me to breathe out longer through my, I don't open my mouth, but it feels like it's down here, not through my nose, and not in through my nose.
So you're breathing through your neck, is what you're saying?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. I don't know, it's coming, it sort of feels like it's, well, it is coming from their mouth.
But you're breathing in through your nose.
I'm in through my nose, but out through my mouth.
Question, when you say sort of inhale, for 1, exhale for 6, but my exhalation gets real slow and the end of it is quite long, so it's actually sort of a bit more of a 4 to 8. Like if I set out to do that, it would be uncomfortable, but when I let it just relax, at least that's what it was this time.
Yeah. So, someone was saying that in fact they breathe out longer normally than 4 to 6, which is perfectly fine. Slow breathing can be up to 4 breaths a minute. The bottom line is that there are multiple breathing techniques out there. I am just giving you what I think is the simple, most direct way you can breathe when you are stressed. So that in the moment when your system is acutely dysregulated, the single most practical, effective tool you can do is take your awareness to your breath. In through your nose, belly breathing, prolonged exhalation, slow breathing if you can. If you can, take 5. Breathe for 5 minutes. Wow, that's kind of long. Breathe for 5 breaths. Seems a little bit more reasonable. Breathe for a count of 10. In for 4, out for 6. But this is the simple, most effective practical tool you can do when you are dysregulated. Breathe. And during the day, I like to call it micro-dosing of the breath. A 365 practice. 3 times a day, 6 breaths a minute for 5 minutes. And what you're doing is you are stabilizing your reactive neurologic system. You are just settling it. You're taking that energy out of your reactivity and hyperactive day. So the more often that you can breathe in an effective manner allows you to be more stable throughout the day. B, got another B, body. We are unbelievably marvelous creatures. We have the capacity to communicate through our speech and thinking mind and through our bodies. When you are acutely stressed out, the speech center in your brain shuts down. The thalamus that controls the flow of information from the lower to the higher centers shuts down. The bottom line is you can't talk your way out of stress when you are really stressed. The only way you can communicate with your system is through your body, non-verbally. And this is an essential tool to dealing with our minds. As we said, when you get into the body, there's only one place you can be. Here, now, in the present moment. Getting into your body takes you out of your ruminating, thinking mind, those 60,000 thoughts a day. So when you get, again, activated, A, label what is known. B, settle yourself with your breath. B, come to your body. So what you want to do is you want to initially identify where is that place of maximal contraction in your body. And you do a quick scan. For most of us, we know where we are tense and where we hold our tension. But we can do a quick scan from the soles of our feet right up to the top of our head. Ah, I hold my tension in my jaw. And I didn't recognize that until I really brought a scan of awareness to it. Ah, that's where it is. Or maybe it's in your shoulders or in your neck. We classically hold most of our tension in our torso, chest, abdomen, and our shoulders and neck and face. So what you want to do is to identify where you're holding your tension. But what often can happen is you can only get so close to that spot. In other words, I get as well this sort of fluttering in my belly, and I can sometimes, no, I don't want to go there. I don't know why, but all I know is that is not a place I want to go to. And so what you can do is a technique called pendulation. So if you're trying to just feel that sense of your body and you can't get to that hot spot, go to a neutral spot. Soles of your feet as they contact the floor, buttocks on the chair, and allow yourself to rest in that place of neutrality, which will then feed back to your brain. Because you see, there is this wonderful interconnectedness between what we think, what we feel emotionally, and how we feel it in our bodies. And as we said before, a calm body feeds back and causes a calm mind. So rest in that physicality until you're stabilized. And then you can bring yourself back as close as you can to the hot spot. And maybe you never get to that hot spot. And maybe it is that pendulation back and forth. But what you're doing is you're allowing yourself to stay with the physicality, to experience it as a direct felt sensation for as long as you can. And ideally, can you sustain awareness of the felt sense until it extinguishes? So why is staying with the body so important? Even before you had language, when you were an infant, when you were stressed, agitated, the first thing that happened was your body prepared for the potential threat, for fight or flight. Not your brain, your body. And then, after your body was prepared, then your mind would read the body signal and say, this is anger, this is fear. The critical part is we process what is going on initially, if it is a threat, in our body, not our minds. So what happens when you are this infant and you are this child, and your body is prepared for this potential threat? Often what happens is that historically, we never mobilized the energy that was trapped in our bodies. And that for some of us, we can chronically carry that held physical tension throughout our life. And nowadays, as an adult, when we get triggered by something that is potentially threatened, that same characteristic way we held that physical energy gets reactivated. So when you have the capacity to come to your body, to feel the body, to stay with that sensation until it dissolves into nothing, what you're doing is you are beginning to mobilize the trapped historical physical energy that lives inside of you. When given the chance, our bodies know how to metabolize this trapped energy. And what we need to do is to allow for the opportunity for the bodies to do what it knows, what it needs to do. Fascinating. You've heard this term, let it be, let it go. All you need to do is to let go of your anxiety and your fear. Well, that's partly true. And from an external sense, our discerning ego in knowing what the self is able to, partly at times to let go of the object of our desire or even a sense of self. But interestingly, there is one other fascinating way to look at this, and that is on an internal sense. Let it be to let it let go. Let it be to let it let go. What is the it that is letting go? When you are able to stay in the midst of the fire in your mind and in your body, what you are doing is you are creating the capacity to hold your inner child wounding that is reliving another traumatic event. You are creating the possibility for reparenting this wounded child. You are creating the possibility of changing the attachment your child had with its caregiver. And so what is the it that is letting go is that inner child psychic holding that you have that is beginning to feel, yeah, Leslie's beside me. I'm okay. I don't have to feel as frightened. And slowly, it's not an external release, but it becomes an internal release. Fascinating, fascinating. So I like to do one last exercise here to put this all together. And I would invite you to sit up, close your eyes. And when something comes into your awareness, into your consciousness, what I'd like you to do is to do the ABB practice. I guess what we're doing is we're creating our abs, so to speak. Awareness, label, knowing. B, breath, prolonged exhalation, 4 to 6. B, body, rest in the felt sense of what is present and sustain it until it extinguishes. So let's bring this exercise to a close. And it may be difficult to get the true appreciation of how one is in relationship, because the real proof is when you are with a charged moment. But if I think that in terms of what I have wanted to offer you today, is this simple process of awareness by labeling, breath to support, and body to be with what is. This is not about fixing yourself. This is not about changing yourself. This is not about altering your story. Mindfulness is, yes, awareness of the present moment, but in its essence, it is about a skillful relationship with the present moment. This is not about freedom from pain and suffering. You're always going to have that. This is about the freedom to be with your pain and your suffering. That capacity to be present without resistance, to understand what it is, to be with it, and to allow it to move through you. And so what I would ask you to explore, and this is a perfect opportunity during the day, boredom, pain, your thinking mind. This is an opportunity to turn towards that and to feel it and to be with it without having the distraction of being on your computer, talking to somebody else. And so again, if this is some value for you, this is the essence of what mindfulness is about. Awareness, skillful relationship with the present moment. So when you did that exercise, was there anything that you noticed? Was there enough time to really have that sense of being with it in a physical sense and labeling it and knowing it?
I found I had to conjure up something
Mm-hmm.
and drop it in. But I think you're exactly right about lacking the charge. It's kind of an intellectual exercise, so in my mind I could work with it, breath, but I didn't feel the
Yeah.
physiological charge in the mind.
Yeah, and it is a bit artificial, and thank you for, this is just an attempt to try and give you the path to do it. The real, the rubber hits the road, is when you're out there. But again, there's nothing complicated about what needs to be done. It's having the awareness, the motivation, the courage to stand in the middle of the fire. Amazing. There's something called the 90-second rule. I don't know if you know about this. Dr. Jill Bolton, I think was her name, a neuroscientist, and she developed a stroke. And she wrote a book, and the stroke of insight. And what she said, and what she explored, is that if you can be with any charged emotional moment for 90 seconds without adding anything else to it, it will pass. In other words, When we're in the midst of it, it seems like it will last forever. But the characteristic, the important insight is, given enough time, everything will pass. So I'd like to finish the last little bit off with just the CDE part of the rest of the alphabet for you. And what I'm going to talk about now is really, I just want to give you a taste for where mindfulness can ultimately go. There is a transformation, a healing that occurs with the capacity to be with what is in our bodies, as we've talked. But it's another interesting aspect to look at how we construct our reality. That ultimately is an alternate path to freedom. 2,600 years ago, what did the Buddha say? Anything we attach to as I, me, or mine leads to suffering. Who's here? I am. Who drove my car here? I did. Who's going to eat lunch? I am. Who's working? I am. Everything is focused on the sense of self. So, let me explain this. This retreat is over. I'm in my car going home. And what happens? My mind says, Phil, that was a retreat? That was a talk? You explained everything? They didn't seem to get it. They didn't understand what you were saying. That was terrible. That was just a terrible retreat. Phil, you are terrible. Do any of you have a mind that talks to you like this? That criticizes the judges and compares? Have you ever thought about this? If I was in control, why would I treat myself so poorly? Think about that. Do you know what your next thought is going to be? I frankly don't know what I'm going to say next to you. But it happens. So, why am I sitting in my car going home and my telling me I did a terrible job? And instantly that means I am terrible. So, here's the way it works. Fascinating. And I'll share a personal history with you. When I was growing up in my house, my mother ruled the house. It was her way or the highway. Please and appease. Be invisible. Be the good boy. And that's the way things work. And so what did I discover about myself? I discovered I wasn't lovable. And I discovered that in order to be lovable, I needed to be perfect. If I could control everything such that nothing untoward could happen, then my mother would be happy. Then I would feel good about who I was. And if she was not upset with me, then I wouldn't feel unsafe and unlovable and unworthy. So what happens? I perceive that the sense of self, my sense of self, has acted in a way in this retreat and what I offered you that wasn't perfect. What does that mean? I am not safe, I am not lovable, and I am not worthy. Every single one of us does not escape this. We all have different degrees of it, but all of us have a history. All of us have a belief system about who we are. we operate in this world from a negative bias. What does that mean? We are animals, truly at our core still. And what is the prime prerogative of an animal? Survival. Is this moment threatening to me or not? I'm not looking for the chocolate cake, because that isn't going to make me alive. I'm looking for the tiger that's going to kill me. And what we have done is we have replaced the tiger with emotional and psychological threats. Every moment we live our existence, we are self-referentially judging. Has the sense of self acted in a way that is congruent or incongruent with the way I believe I should behave? We are creating a sense of self every moment that is appropriate for this moment. We have created coping strategies that compensate for what we perceive is our inadequacies and in our flaws. We live trapped by our narratives. We identify with a sense of self that at its core is flawed and inadequate. That means we are flawed and inadequate. And that is the legacy of being human and how we live each moment. And so coming to our bodies, we're allowing ourselves to hold our wounding and let it pass through. But in understanding our belief system and identifying in this moment, why am I so terrible right now? What's going on? What's being triggered? I believed I wasn't perfect. That's why I'm terrible. Because I don't feel lovable. And identifying that process moment to moment, we begin to see the sense of self is just made up moment to moment. And we begin to recognize that there is some beautiful, inherent worth in all of us in just being human. That we have these unbelievable capacities to create, to think, to feel, to move. And that is not something that can be altered by what our minds superimpose upon this innate worthiness. And freedom ultimately comes from the realization that we are at our core safe, lovable, and worthy. And that we live our life with the stories that we make up about us. And seeing that process, we begin to deconstruct the sense and the solidity of the self. And we begin to disentangle from owning the self so that we can be present in that moment with just, this is what my mind has just created. And over time, it's like, boy, oh boy, I've heard those words, I am terrible, a gazillion times. And it begins to lessen and to loosen more and more. And so ultimately what can happen is you can be present in the moment with joy. And what your mind is saying to you is just words without energy. There's no energy in the sense of a self that says, I am terrible. And there's no energy in the sense of self that says, I am aware that I am saying I am terrible. That you ultimately come to a place where you are just present, open, and aware. And when there isn't a sense of self that you have to defend moment to moment, you know what that does? It allows you to open. It allows you to become interconnected, interdependent with others, because you are not a threat to me. We are simply here together in this world without anything to defend. And it's a beautiful feeling. And I think that this path is a wonderful path. And we start with awareness, and we start with breath, and we start with body. And over time, we move on to seeing the truth of the sense of self and begin to let it go and operate from that wonderful place of presence, of knowing, of joy and interconnectedness. And I can speak for myself that I've been doing this for about 28 years. And the fascinating thing about this path is it does you. That you put the effort in and things begin to appear that I had no intention of it ever appearing. There's a sense of empathy and compassion for self and other that just is. You don't manufacture it. It happens. And I think this is the beauty of the practice. That you're given a gift that you had no expectation. A capacity to be present in this world from a mind that doesn't always criticize and compare and judge. And that is beautiful when it happens. And it takes time and effort. And I'm sure Leslie can share her own benefits that she has obtained from this practice. And so you say, yeah, I have a practice. Maybe not every day. Why practice? Why practice? Well, because maybe you can hear the benefits that people have derived from it. And I've shared honestly with you what I have gotten from this. Like you, I started out in this practice because I was a type A personality. And I had stress and I had pain. And I wanted to find a way to lessen that stress and that pain. And the practice has offered that to me. I was never a faith-based individual. But fascinating, when I started this practice, I don't know what it was, but I had a faith, a belief that this was important and necessary to do. I had no reason to believe that. I had no one who I knew meditated, but it was of value. And so one last thing about another part of the C word, compassion. When my mind starts to talk to me, I begin to realize this is my wounded inner child that is talking to me. It's not me as an adult. And I bring to mind an anchoring image. I have this image of myself when I was 5. And I would always ask my mother, do you love me? Why would a 5-year-old ask? And at that moment she said, of course I love you. Why do you ask? With a tone. And I can remember to this day how I felt, what went through my mind, and I can imagine how I looked. And I said to myself, I will never ask if I am loved, because I know not. And that is my anchoring image. I use that image when my mind starts to criticize and judge me, because I can see that and it touches me, and I can spontaneously offer compassion to it. Because it's so hard to offer compassion to ourselves. It's very, very difficult. But what I'm doing with this anchoring image is offering compassion to my wounded child. And if I can't choose my wounded child, then what I choose is someone that I love, that I care for, another person, a pet, and use that as the image that I bring to the moment in order to elicit spontaneous compassion for myself and others. And when I want to offer compassion to other, what I do is I say to myself, what's their story? Why are they acting the way they are acting? It connects us. And then the next question I say is this about enrage or outrage? They may be doing something, but what's going on inside? And when someone else triggers me, 2 things. I ask myself, what's going on in them? But more importantly, what is being triggered in me? This is not about them. This is about me. What vulnerability is being touched by them what vulnerability in me is being triggered by them in this moment? So that's the way to develop compassion for self and other. Finally, DE, do it ethically. As I said, most of the time we operate because we are acting to keep ourselves safe, loved, and worthy. We are acting to compensate for our deficiency. And as what has been said here, wow, I wish I was smart enough not to say and do it before I did it. And so, if you can remember, before you speak, before you act, say the word, wait. Wait for intention. What am I trying to do? What am I trying to say? Wait for intentionality. Why am I talking? Why am I trying to do this? If you know what you are going to say, because it plays in your mind, you can hear it before you say it. It is true. And you know what you're going to do because it plays out in your mind before you do it. If you can develop the capacity to say wait before you act and before you speak, you'll probably save yourself a lot of trouble. And one last thing to ask yourself when you want to act is the question, what needs to be done if it isn't about me? It allows you to imagine what is the skillful action in this moment independent of meeting my needs? Is this action based on generosity, compassion, non-harming, respect, friendliness, kindness? We have a few minutes. Anything that resonates with you with all of this?
As you said, it's way easier, well, for me, it's way easier to be compassionate and kind and understanding to others. Sometimes I am sort of overwhelmed with how much I understand this person's stuff and that person's stuff and why they behave this way and that. But it's like, okay, I see it all, I understand it, I can feel for them, but you know, so many therapists now talk about sort of dealing directly with the nervous system to break those visceral patterns. Because I can watch myself do it all. Like, you know, oh, I'm at the top of that slippery slope of, you know, self-loathing and crap, these really old patterns. But there's something so familiar sometimes, and like, awareness is really great. For me, it's just it's a part of it. It's the first part, obviously. It's a really necessary part. But it doesn't lead to these magical aha moments that break those patterns.
Yeah. So what we're hearing is that there's no easy fix. And again, it is a practice of continuing to do this, to be aware of the present moment. I think to bring our breath to it, to feel it in a physical sense as a way of mobilizing our fear. And in time, understanding, can we let go of the sense of self and be present from our innate sense of worth? And in the moment when your mind is going crazy, it can also be helpful to simply say, as that see or cognition part, my dear child, what is calling to be heard? A way of remembering, recollecting. Any other feedback or insights or thoughts?
I would just say that everything resonated with me, and I won't be specific on that, but it just reminded me that I'm on the right path in what I'm doing, and that it brought me here, and what you're going through this morning is very helpful for me in where I'm at, and I have gratitude for that, both for you and for the path that brought me here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think Leslie and I are really sharing personal experience. It's what we have learned on our path. And I want to just close this session by saying, what I have offered to you is my personal insight, my truth, what I have learned from the path. But it hasn't been a blanket acceptance of what I have learned. You need to take what I have said. Does that resonate for me? Is that true for me? Yes, no. Can I modify it in a way that works? And what I have offered to you is what I like to think of as an integrated form of mindfulness. Historically, Buddhism, where mindfulness came from, knew nothing about developmental psychology. And I think there is a tremendous marriage between Western psychological understandings to see how we create our sense of self and reach that Eastern understanding of who are we beyond our sense of self.